have a group G and a representation of G is you need to have a vector space V. So on a vector space V, so you'll be looking at is a way of writing the elements of the group as matrices. So it's a function. I'll use the Greek letter rho for this, from G to linear transformations on V. So I'll use this notation. I don't know if it's familiar to all of you. GLV. So what is GLV? So GLV is linear transformations G from V to V, such that so G is linear and G is invertible. Okay, so if V is Cn complex, so let's say this is some vector space over C, complex numbers, but you can take other fields as well. It doesn't matter much for this talk. If V is Cn, then this will just be n by n invertible matrices over with entries in C. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast. Somebody says they're not able to hear. Is there a problem with the audio? Okay, so yeah, so somebody was having problem with the audio, but it seems to be fine for most people. And I hope this level at which I'm presenting is okay. Most of you are comfortable with the notions that I have introduced so far. I've talked about groups. I've talked about GLV, the invertible linear transformations on a vector space. And it's like a matrix group, so group of invertible matrices. Yeah. Okay, so if you have any doubts, just feel free to unmute your mic and ask me, but then remember to mute it again after asking. Okay, so don't hesitate to just interrupt me. So it's difficult to give a talk online because I cannot see everyone's faces, and then I am not sure, like, you know, if what I'm saying is clear or not. But it takes some getting used to this. But I think it's helpful if you feel free to question. Okay, so let's. Okay, so we have it's a function, and what kind of function is it? It's a function which is also a group homomorphism. So it has the property that. So there are two properties I want. One is that rho takes the identity element of the group G. So you know every group has an identity element to the identity linear transformation on V. So the identity function from V to V, and rho of G1 times G2. If I take two elements of G, then this is rho of G1. This is a linear transformation, and I can compose it with the linear transformation rho of G2 for all G1, G2 in G. Okay, so that's the definition of a representation. So let me give you an example of a representation. So let's take G to be the group C6. So this is the group of cyclic group of order 6. I like to think of it as also integers mod 6. So another way to think of this group is that you have a clock, but instead of 12 hours, you have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have only 6 hours, and so you know in this after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you go back to 1. 1. No, I think I need one more, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's like 12 o'clock. So you go after counting 6, you go back to 1. So if it's 4 o'clock, then 4 hours later it will be 1, 2, 3, 4. It will be 2 o'clock, right? In a 6-hour clock. So this is the integers mod 6, residue classes mod 6. And this is a group under addition of residue classes. Okay. So we're getting some noise here. Maybe let's check your mic. Simi, you have a question? Or? Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a question? Okay. I can't hear you, but your mic is on. So.
Sir,
Okay. So.
example is not clear properly. Can you please repeat?
Yeah.
Example is not clear properly. Can you please repeat?
Oh, okay. What should I repeat? I mean, so. Oops.
Example.
Okay. Okay. Let me. It seems like this thing. Uh, okay. So one sec. I'm having some problem here. My presentation stopped. Oh, okay. It looks like my. Okay, so I'll continue here. So what I was saying is that a representation is a function from G to GLV, where V is a group, and I was trying to give you an example. So I'll take G to be Z mod 6Z, and so this has elements 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 5 plus 1 is 0 again. And you can take row of I to be cos 2 pi I by 6, sine 2 pi I by 6, minus sine 2 pi I by 6, and cos 2 pi I by 6. Yeah. Okay, so this matrix, you must have seen it before. This is the matrix of rotation by an angle of 2 pi I by 6. So if I is 0, then this is the identity matrix. If I is 1, it's rotation by 60 degrees, and so on. And what we know is that rho of I plus j is rho of I times rho of j, because if you rotate by I times 60 degrees and then rotate by j times 60 degrees, it's the same as rotating as I plus j times 60 degrees. So this is an example of a representation. Okay, and in representation theory, we use very commonly this notion of the character of a representation. And let me define that. And later I will try to explain why these characters are so important. Okay, so the character of a representation. So we have this representation rho and takes a group G to GLB. Then we'll talk about the character of rho. So this is something simpler than the representation itself, but it turns out that it carries all the information that you need about the representation. So the character of rho is usually denoted by the Greek letter chi, and I'll put rho here to signify that it's the character of rho. This is a function from G to just complex numbers. And what is this function? How is it defined? Chi rho of G is just the trace of, now remember, rho of G is a linear map from V to V, so I can talk about its trace. So it's the trace of rho G on V. So in this example, what is the character of this representation? Here, character of Greek letter chi rho rho I equals 2 times cosine 2 pi I by 6. So that's the character of this representation here, right? Just the trace of this matrix. And here's a nice exercise for you which you can try is suppose you have G and H in G, then the character value at HGH inverse is equal to the character value at G. So this just uses the property of the trace, that trace of A times B is the trace of B times A. But it gives this identity on character values. Now, if you've studied some group theory, you may have seen the notion of conjugacy classes. So we say that G is conjugate to G prime means that uh, there exists an element H in G such that G prime is HG H inverse. Okay, so this is the definition of conjugacy. And what this exercise here is saying is that the character is invariant under conjugacy. That is, if two elements are conjugate, then the value of the character is the same. So you don't need to compute the character at every element of the group. You just need to compute it at one element in each conjugacy class in the group. Okay, so far what have I done? I've defined a representation. I've talked about its character, which is a trace, and I've given you an exercise which is to prove that this character is invariant under conjugation. Okay, now we need a few more notions, and one is the invariant vectors. So let's define the invariant vectors. So this is for a representation rho. So V is said to be invariant if V belongs to V is invariant if rho GV is equal to V for all elements of the group. That means this vector is not at all moved by any element of the group. So in this example, we don't have any invariant vectors except for the zero vector, because this transformation here is rotation by 60 degrees. So every non-zero vector gets moved to its rotation by 60 degrees. Okay, but suppose you had a reflection or something, so let me give you an example of representation with an invariant vector. So take this representation of Z mod 2Z to uh, 2 by 2 matrices GL2C with rho of 0. This has to be the identity, of course, identity matrix. Maybe I'll just write it explicitly. And rho of 1 to be just the reflection. It interchanges the x and y axis. Then we see that an invariant vector would be 1, 1 is an invariant vector. Okay. Okay, so this is a very strong condition. A slightly weaker condition is just being invariant under a single element of G. So we say that V belongs to V is invariant under G if rho GV is equal to, so a single element G. So in this and we will write Vg for the space of all vectors V in V, sorry, V small g for the set of all vectors V in V such that rho g P is equal to V. Okay, so in this example, in this first example here, um, rho V of 0 is the full vector space. V of I is just the trivial vector I equals 1 to 5 in the first example. In the second example, this is for first example, which is the rotation by 60 degrees and its multiples. In the second example, again V of 0 is C2, but V of 1 is just uh, x comma x, where x belongs to C, this one-dimensional subspace. And this Vg is always a subspace. It's easy to see that Vg is always a subspace. Okay. So now, so this is all fairly straightforward definitions. I hope everything is clear. If you have any questions, maybe you can type it in the chat. There's some. Okay. So seems like there are no questions so far. Maybe I'll move on. Okay, now for the first sort of interesting result in this talk, which tells you the importance of characters. So this is a theorem. I don't know whom it is due to. It's a very it's been known for a long time that the dimension of Vg. So the vectors which are invariant under all elements of the group. This is 1 over the size of G sum G in G chi rho. So in that first example where we had rotations by 60 degrees and multiples, this would be 0, and you can check that if you take sum of cos 2 pi I by 6, I goes from 0 to 5, it will actually be 0. Okay, so this is the theorem. The proof is somewhat clever. Basically, it's what you have to do is you have to take this rho g. So for every element G in G, you have this action rho g. Now, if you choose a basis of your vector space V, this rho g is just a matrix. Okay, otherwise you can think of it as a linear transformation, whatever you're comfortable with. What we'll do is we will add this, average this over the entire group G. So we'll take sum over G in G and we'll divide by G. So let's call this P. Okay, so this is a linear map. Okay, P of V is 1 over G summation G in G rho G. Okay, you can think of P as a linear transformation. It's the averaging of all the values of the representation. Now, I claim two things. Firstly, that P squared is equal to P, and secondly, that the image of P. That means if I take P and look at the image of V under P, this is the space of invariant vectors. Okay, so that's okay. So let's prove this. So the main point to prove this claim is that if you take V, if V is already invariant in under G, then let's look at what happens. Then PV is equal to 1 over size of G summation G in G rho GV. But uh, saying that V is invariant under G means that rho GV is actually equal to V, right? So rho GV is just V. So I can write so I just get sum over G in G, the vector V itself, and so that's just, but then I'm dividing by G, so I get just um, V itself, right? Because I will have added V to itself once for each element of G, so that many cardinality of G many times. So if V is in Vg, then uh, PV is equal to V. And the second point is that, so this is the first point. So what we are saying is point A, sorry, I have 1, 2, and now I have A. If V is in Vg, then PV is equal to V. And the second point is that uh, for any V in V, PV is invariant. PV belongs to Vg. Let's see that. So this is where the averaging is going to play an important role. So we want to see that PV is in Vg. So what we want to see is what is rho G of PV. We want to show that rho G of PV is equal to PV. So let's just expand this out. So this is rho G, and what was the definition of P? The definition of P is averaging of rho G. So this is 1 over size of G sum G in G rho, maybe I shouldn't call this G, I'll call this H, change the indexing variable, rho H V. Okay, but these are linear transformations, so I can bring this inside and I get 1 over G summation H belongs to G rho of G rho of H times V. Okay, and then I'll use the property of a representation that rho of G times H is rho of G. I can take that inside the rho. And now I will use a property of groups that if you take G times H as H runs over G, you will get every element of G exactly once. In the sense that if you write GH equals G prime, this has a unique solution for every G prime in G. So you can write G prime as G as G prime times H inverse. So if I do this substitution, then I get 1 over G in G rho of HV, or maybe I can call it G prime rho of G prime. But this is just P of V by definition, right? The average of rho of G overall. So what we've got is that if you take PV, then rho G times PV is equal to PV. So we have point B that PV belongs to VG. So let's come back to what we want to prove. So we have proved two things. We have proved that V belongs to VG implies PV is equal to V, and we have proved that PV belongs to VG for all V. So PV belongs to VG for all V is just saying that the image of P is contained in invariant vectors, right? And and if you combine these two, then it's saying that P squared is equal to P, right? So if you apply, um, if you take P of V, then P of V is in VG, so P of V is equal to P of V. So P squared is P, and if you take an invariant vector anyway, you know that P of V is V. So if you have a vector in VG, then it is in the image of P. So both these 1 and 2, A plus B, this implies 1 and 2. Okay, so we have that P squared is P. This is called an idempotent linear transformation, and the image of P is V of G. Okay, so let's just remember these two things. I think let's see. Okay, so let me go down here. So we have these two facts. So now P squared is P. So we can write this as P squared minus P is 0, or P into identity minus P is 0, which means that P satisfies the equation x into 1 minus x. This means that eigenvalues of P are all 0 or 1. And so the rank of P is the number of eigenvalues equal to 1, which is the same as the sum of the eigenvalues, because each of them is equal to 1. But that's the trace of P. Okay, so for an idempotent matrix, rank is equal to trace. And so now what we have is dimension of VG. Well, that's just the rank of P, right? Because VG is the image of P. But that we see is the trace of P. But the trace of P, what is that? Well, it's just 1 over G. It's the trace of 1 over G, G in G, rho G. It's the trace of this thing. But trace is a linear map, so I can just take the trace inside, and what I get is this. Okay, so this proves the first theorem that we have, that the dimension of the invariants of a representation is the average value of the trace. So you see why characters, this is just a sort of first glimpse of why characters play such an important role in understanding representations. Okay. So, okay. So hopefully things are clear to everyone. I'll move on. So now the other thing I need to discuss is group actions and orbits. So so I'm going to use this terminology of G set. So basically what it is a set X with an action of G. Let me explain what a group action is. So an action of G on X is a function sometimes called the action function A G cross X to X, which satisfies two properties. The first is that, so I'll write this thing as G comma X. Instead of writing A of G comma X, I'll just write it as G dot X. Okay, and there are two properties. One is that the identity property, identity of G, the identity element of the group G takes X to X for every X in X. And the second is the compatibility with the group structure, which says that if I take G dot H dot X, so then this is the same as GH dot X for all GH in G and X in X. So this is the notion of an action. Intuitively, what it is that the elements of the group are transforming the set X. So each element of the group does something to the set X. It moves around the elements of X. And if you think of this, if you fix G and you look at the function x goes to G dot X, it will have the inverse, the function x goes to G inverse dot X because of this compatibility property. Because if you take G dot G inverse dot X, then it's G times G inverse dot X, which is just identity times X. And so by this A property, it is equal to X. So these are mutual inverses. And so what this means is that this function x goes to G dot X has to be a bijection. Okay, so this group has now become a group of transformations of the set X. An example of a group action is actually a representation. A representation is an action on a vector space. The additional condition is that the action is by linear functions. Okay, um, so that's the notion of a group action. Um, so I'll just give you an example. So we have this group Z mod 6Z, and this group acts on necklaces with 6 beads. Necklaces with 6 beads. So what it does is I have my necklace with 6 beads. Can think of it basically as a hexagon with the beads as the vertices, and just let's say these beads are numbered somehow 1 2 3 4 5 6. So these 6 beads, you can think of it as a set 1 2 3 4 5 6, and this you just rotate this by I into 60 degrees. So the action of I dot a bead, which is let's say B, uh, is just maybe I'll call this bead 1, bead 2, bead 3, bead 4, bead 5, bead 6 is just B of I plus J mod 6. Okay, so that's an example of a group action. So the group Z mod 6Z acts on necklace with 6 beads. But you can have more complicated situations. You can have, here's a more interesting example. So many examples actually come from graph theory. You can think of these objects as graphs. So here's a somewhat more interesting example. This is of course the necklace so far, but it becomes very interesting if you draw some more edges here. So this graph here is called the octahedral graph, and you can show that the symmetric group S3 acts on this. Is it S3 or S4? S4. Yeah, S4 acts on this graph. We'll play with this later, maybe using a computer or something. Okay. So from actually graph theory gives rise to a lot of very nice group actions. I'll come back to that theme later. But this is just to give you a notion of what is a group action. I'm sure some of you have seen it before. Um, and there's an important feature of a group action, which is the notion of orbits. So we'll say that X and Y, the two elements of X. So X is a G set, then you take two elements of X, we say that they are equivalent under G if there exists an element G in G which moves X to Y. So in this necklace action, all the elements are equivalent because you start with any bead, you can rotate it by 60 degrees some number of times to get all the other beads. Okay, so everything is equivalent. And but in general, it may not be the case that the group can move every element to every other element. So that's the notion of equivalence, and you know that so you have to check that this is an equivalence relation. So firstly, X is equivalent to X because what? Because identity of G times X is equal to X. Then you have to check symmetry. If X is equivalent to G dot X is equal to Y, but that G inverse dot Y is equal to X, so Y is equal to X. And I'll let you think about why this relation is transitive. So anyway, this thing is an equivalence relation, and the equivalence classes are called orbits. So this is an equivalence relation. The equivalence classes are called orbits. Or you can, if you want to be specific, you would say G orbits in X. Okay, and the other notion okay, and the set of G orbits I'll write by X, well, X and then a slash and G. So X, and then you're kind of making all things that can be moved from one to another under G as equivalent. Yeah, so I don't have this. So X slash on the left G. Sometimes you can write X slash on the right G, but then usually because I'm writing the elements of G on the left here, I'm putting it on the left here. So this is the left action. Okay, so this is the set of G orbits. And the other notion I need is somewhat simpler. It's the set of G invariants. So X superscript G is the set of all X in X such that G dot X is equal to X. So the elements which are not moved by G at all. Okay, so in this necklace action, if you take the identity homomorphism, then nothing is moved by it. But if you take any other rotation, then then X of identity is always all of X. This is true for any group action. But in this, X of I is empty if I is not equal to 0. No bead is left invariant by a non-trivial element of this group. Okay. So we have these two notions, orbits and fixed points. So these are called fixed points or G fixed points. G fixed points. And now we come to the second sort of very interesting result which relates these two. And this is called Burnside's lemma, popularly called Burnside's lemma, or sometimes it's called the Cauchy-Frobenius lemma. So it's called Burnside's lemma because Burnside popularized its use, but it was not discovered by Burnside. It's been known for a long time. But I'll just call it the orbit counting theorem. Okay, so, but if you see somebody saying Burnside's lemma, then you should know that it's the same as this orbit counting theorem. And it says that the number of orbits in G, G orbits in X, is the average over the group G. This is a very strange thing. Now I'm counting over the group G of what? I'm averaging the number of fixed points. Number of fixed points over all elements of G is the number of orbits of G. So there are many proofs of this, including proofs which are perhaps more intuitive. I'm going to give you a proof which uses ideas from representation theory, because I have a soft corner for representation theory. I've spent many years doing representation theory. So I'll give you a proof using representation theory. Yeah, maybe I should say that if you want to see other proofs, there's this book by Polya and Reed, which anyway will have everything that's in this talk. It's called Combinatorial Enumeration of Groups, Graphs, and Chemical Compounds. Okay, so it's in the if the notes have been shared, it's in the notes. So okay, so let me give you a proof of this orbit counting theorem, which uses representation theory. So firstly, I need to construct a representation for which. So what I'm going to do basically is, we have this earlier theorem which says that the dimension of G invariants is the average of the character, average value of the character. So this looks somewhat similar in shape there. Instead of dimension of Bg, we have number of orbits, and instead of averaging the character values, we are just averaging the number of fixed points. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to construct a representation for which the left hand side becomes the left hand side of this, and the right hand side of this Burnside's lemma becomes the right hand side of that. So what is my representation? Vector space. Let V be the vector space with basis. And there's some noise coming. Ritika, you have a question?
Yes.
Some noise
Sir.
coming from your mic. I'm not sure if.
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yeah.
So you define orbits using necklace sections. Can we define stabilizer also?
Yeah. I defined orbits using what?
Necklace sections. Using
Oh yeah,
necklace
no, I
sections.
defined it in general, not just for neck. Yeah, you can also define stabilizer. I'll come to yeah.
Okay.
So the fixed points and stabilizer are kind of dual things. So in the when you talk about fixed points, you fix an element of the group and you look at which elements of X are fixed by it. And when you talk about stabilizers, you fix an element X and you ask which elements of the group fix it. Okay, but I haven't really talked about stabilizers in this as yet. But I hope that clarifies for you. Okay, so let's go on. So I'm taking V to be the vector space with a basis. I'll just give it some symbols, one symbol, one basis vector for each element of X. So I'll call it 1 sub X. You can think of it as a function which is 1 at X and 0 everywhere else, or just think of it as a formal symbol. And now I'll define an action, rho G. So I'll define rho from G to GLB. So I must tell you what it does, rho G does to a basis vector. So rho G takes this basis vector to another basis vector. So it's a very simple linear transformation. It takes one subscript X to one subscript G dot X. So yeah. And what is the, so this is going to be the representation, and what I'm going to show to you is that the left hand side of this is going to be the dimension of G invariants, and the right hand side is going to be the average value of the number of fixed points. um, so so firstly, let's look at this. We need to compute its character, right? So what is the matrix of this? So this base is 1x x in x. So if you maybe if you enumerate the elements of x, x1, x2, x, whatever the size of this thing is, r, if you write x like this, then you can think of this as an ordered basis, 1x1, 1x2, 1xr. But so what is the entry rho g of, so if I take 1x, um, so ei, so let me just write it down. But instead of that, I'll just take the matrix whose rows and columns are indexed by elements of x. So you can think of rho g as a matrix whose rows and columns are indexed by x in x. So to find the matrix of a linear transformation, to find the ijth entry, you take the coordinate vector corresponding to y, and you see how it expands in terms of x. So it turns out that this is going to be 1 if y is equal to g dot x and 0 otherwise, right? So this is delta of x comma g dot x. So I mean, this is the Kronecker delta symbol. So that means this is 1 if, sorry, not x, y comma, no, I think it should be g dot y. It's 1 if x is equal to g dot y and 0 otherwise. Okay, so this is how you go from a linear transformation to the matrix. You take a coordinate vector, you take the jth coordinate vector, and its image gives you the jth column of the matrix. So yeah, so this is the matrix. And so what is the trace of this matrix? Trace of rho g is sum over all x in x. You sum over the basis rho g x subscript x. So that is equal to sum over x in x delta of x comma g dot x. Right? But when is g dot x equal to x? This is just when x is a fixed point. So this is just the number of g fixed points. So the character of this representation rho is rho of g is just the number of fixed points. And so this right hand side actually becomes the right hand side of this earlier equation, the average value of the character. Okay. What about the left hand side? So we want to know what is the number of orbits. So we want to see if it's the number of fixed points. So let's ask when is vector v. So any vector v in this vector space is of the form summation a subscript x mod x, right? Every vector in a vector space can be expanded in terms of the basis. So this is the expansion in terms of basis. So when is v in a G invariant vector? So let's just see what is rho g dot v is summation x in x. So I have to apply rho g to this, right? So let's just rho g applied to this sum. But rho g is linear, so I can take it inside. And so we get x in x, ax, 1 sub gx. So I want that rho g of v is equal to v for v to be fixed, right? I want this to be equal for fixed point. So I want that summation ax 1 sub x is equal to summation a sub x 1 sub gx. Or I can write this, if I want it in the same form, I can write a sub g inverse dot x 1 sub x just by reindexing the summation. Okay, so we want that this vector is equal to this vector for all g in G, which means that ax is equal to a g inverse x for all g in G. But for all g in G means I can also say for all g inverse in G. So this inverse is not important. So what you're saying is that ax is equal to a g dot x for all g in G. So that is when, and for all x in X, of course. So a vector of this, a general vector is of this form, summation ax 1 sub x. It is going to be invariant if ax only depends on the orbit of x. It doesn't depend on which x we're using, but if two elements in the same orbit, the value should be the same. And moreover, you can choose, once you choose a value for an orbit, you can just, for each element, just pick elements in the orbits, and you just give all elements in the same orbit the same value. You will be able to construct a G invariant vector. So what we get is that the G invariant vectors are given by summation a x1 to the x, where ax equals ay if and only if, not if and only if x and y are in the same orbit. Which means you just need to choose one value for each orbit. So dimension of Vg is the number of orbits under G of x. So what we get is orbit space with this representation, this thing becomes dimension of Vg, and this becomes 1 over G summation G in G chi rho. So this orbit counting theorem is just a consequence of the earlier theorem where we computed the dimension of invariant vectors. The orbit counting theorem can be refined, and that is what Polya's Polya enumeration theorem does. It's a very clever refinement of the orbit counting theorem. It's a little harder to prove than the orbit counting theorem. So it's been sort of an hour. How long can I carry on? So is there a is there a time limit? When will, can I carry on for another half an hour or so, or would that be too long?
Yes, of course, sir. You can carry on.
Yes.
12:30.
Okay. And I hope I hope it's not going too fast.
No. It's the correct pace. No. Okay.
So we proved one very nice theorem here, orbit counting theorem, pure combinatorics, right? And this other theorem, okay, it's a little bit representation theory, but it is equivalent. It implies the orbit counting theorem in combinatorics. This is sort of interplay between representation theory and combinatorics is in fact a very common thing, and my research is based a lot on these kind of interactions. Okay, now I'll talk about colorings, and this is a very simple notion of colorings. Many of you are interested in graph theory. You would be more, you look at much more complicated things. But for me, a coloring of a set X is just a function. So I have C is a set of colors. So, I could have maybe many colors, C1, C2, C3, C4, and so on. Okay, so I have some colors, maybe R colors in total. Here I have R equals 4, and the coloring is a function f from a coloring of x is a function from x to c. Okay, so if x are the beads of my necklace, then coloring would be like you put some colors in the beads. So I'll paint these two orange, I'll paint this and this red, and I'll paint this one green, and maybe I'll paint this one. So this is a coloring of this necklace with 4 colors. Now in graph theory, you would not allow this kind of a thing of two, you would say proper coloring means that these two cannot have the same color. But right now we are just looking at colorings. There's no other thing. Even if the thing is a graph, we're not putting any conditions. Okay, so coloring is just a function from x to c. And we will have, now turn this into something somewhat algebraic. So I will talk about the weight of a coloring. So to each of these colors, I will associate a variable. So T1, T2, T3, and T4. So these are the 4 variables associated to these 4 colors, and I can talk about the weight of a color. So weight of F is just defined to be T1, maybe I'll write it like this. Product x belongs to x, T subscript color of x. Okay, so let's figure out what is the weight of this coloring here. So the weight of this coloring, so first I'll take this first bead, its color is T4. The second bead also, its color is T4. The third bead's color is T2. The fourth bead color is T3. The fifth bead's color is, whoops, I don't have, let me add this color green, C5, and it will have variable T5. So this is T5, and then again T3. So the weight of this, if I call this F, then the weight of F is this. But I can just write this as T2, T3 squared, T4 squared, T5. Okay, so this is the weight of this guy. So the variable Ti is raised to the power the number of elements of X which have the ith color. So this is also can be written as T1 to the lambda 1, T2 to the lambda 2, Tr to the lambda r, where lambda I is the number of elements in X such that the color of X is Ci for each I. Okay, so that's the weight of a coloring. So we are going to somehow count using these kind of weights. Okay, so let's do a warm up of this kind of counting. And this is, in combinatorics, we call this generating function. So I'll write Cx for the set of all colorings of X by color C. And here's a nice little formula which is not very difficult. It says that if you take the sum over all colorings of the weight of the coloring. So this is called the generating function of colorings. So generating function, you have some set and the elements have weights, and then the generating function is just the sum over the set of the weights of the elements in that set. And this is T1 plus, I'm assuming that here there are R colors, T1 plus Tr raised to the power size of X. And well, the proof, it's just about looking at how do you expand this product. Okay, so what is the right hand side? I would say, okay, let me write down the thing first. So I want to say that it is a coloring. So you have for each element of x, you have a factor of the form t1 plus t2 plus dot 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 tr. Okay, and we are trying to expand this product. So when you expand a product, distributivity tells you that you must choose one element from each factor, and then you must add up the result of all the possible choices of an element from the first factor, all the possible choices from the second factor, and so on. So suppose so this is I'm choosing one element from each factor. So if I choose ti from the xth factor, from the factor corresponding to little x, then I will say that I have colored the element little x with the color ci. So what I want to say is that this is the product over all x in x t subscript fx. So I'm just choosing from each factor one of the variables t, and I'm doing this over all possible such choices. So the right hand side is just this, but this is actually the left hand side. Okay, so this is just distributivity of multiplication. If you think about distributivity of multiplication, this is what you get, and that's this. So this I hope this is clear. You can try it out with 2 variables or 3 variables and see how it works. Okay, so we'll continue. We are going to sort of soup up this lemma to get the Polya enumeration. Okay. Now I'll define equivalence of colorings. So so this is what Polya calls equivalence of colorings, but I'll just define it as orbits of a certain action. So if X is now a G set, then you can look at Cx. This is also becomes a G set. The action is G dot F. So F is a coloring. So F is a function from X to C. So G dot F should also be a function from X to C. So I need to tell you what its value at X is. So this should be a color, and you define it as F of G inverse dot X. So this inverse actually comes in, unfortunately, and makes life very difficult. But what you should try to do as an exercise is to prove that what I've defined there satisfies these 2 axioms of group action. So yeah, where is my group actions gone? Yeah, here. These axioms for group action, the identity and the compatibility axiom. So when you try to prove the compatibility axiom, you will need to have this inverse. If you don't have the inverse, what you will get is G dot H dot X is HG dot X. That is the problem that you will come up with. So maybe later you can try to work this out, but this is an action on the coloring. And we say that 2 colorings are equivalent if they lie in the same G orbit. So let's come back to the example of necklaces, which is always a wonderful example to keep in mind. So I have this necklace here, and oops, I don't want it there. I want it somewhere here. Yeah, I want it here. Okay, great. I got it here, and let's see if I can get. Okay, I didn't try this before. Can I somehow rotate this? Um, no. Okay, let's just draw another necklace. So I have this coloring, and to say that something is in the orbit of this coloring, now my group Z mod 6 just acts by rotations. So here's another coloring which is in the same orbit. I'll just shift the colors. So I will paint these two orange, this one blue, well, dark blue. Then after that I will put red, and I'll put red here, and I'll put green here. Okay, so I have these two necklaces, and what you can see is if I take this necklace and rotate it by maybe once, twice, thrice, 3 times, right? So rotation by 180 degrees, then you will get this necklace. So what it is that the element 3 in Z mod 6Z, this element takes this necklace to this necklace. So these two necklaces are equivalent, and this is from a very practical point of view. These are equivalent. Suppose, you know, some of us are very fashion conscious. I don't like to wear the same shirt 2 times during the same week. And if I do wear it, you know, some of my colleagues say, oh, look at this guy, he's wearing the same shirt 2 times. I don't wear necklaces, but, you know, if I wore necklaces, I may not want to wear the same necklace 2 times during the same week. And just rotating the necklace, well, that doesn't make it a new necklace. It's still the same old necklace, right? So, these are equivalent. It's the same thing. These are not different. But what would be different is if I, you know, changed one of these. If I took this bead and instead I colored it maybe you know, maybe what was it? It was green, right? So suppose I change it to blue, then hey, this is a new necklace, and I can wear this tomorrow. So so these are not equivalent. These two are not equivalent. Not equivalent. But in fact, these two necklaces are not equivalent. Actually, if I had this necklace, I took it home and tried to make this necklace, I would have to throw away a green bead and buy a blue bead and add it to this necklace. But it's also possible that I have the same number of beads and still have inequivalent necklaces. So for example, if I did something like this, if I made this guy green, so if I made this one red and this one green, then these are different necklaces with the same set of beads, and these are still not equivalent, even though they have the same set of beads. In some sense, their weights are the same, but they are not equivalent. And this is a problem that arises all the time in chemistry. So in chemistry, you can have molecules which have the same atoms, but they are arranged in different ways. Okay, I won't go into the chemistry thing. You'll find a lot of very nice examples in the book of Polya and Reed. This is probably not a great, I don't know if this works really in chemistry, like you have benzene or something, right? And then in benzene, you can put different radicals on the different carbon atoms. And so you could imagine that, you know, you have three, you know, green radical, orange radical, red radical, and blue radical, and if they are arranged like this. But I'm not sure, you know, I remember also like being told in school that, you know, benzene is not exactly like this, there's some electron cloud and this. I'm not sure if this is chemically sound example. So I won't go into the chemistry, but of course for, yeah, so the question is, you know, are these two molecules going to have the same chemical properties or not? And the answer is no, they will not have the same chemical properties. The fact that these two red things occur next to each other and here there is a green thing in between will change the chemical properties. And so this is why one of the applications of representation theory to science has been a lot to chemistry and the study of isomers. Okay, so but let's stick to mathematics here. I don't have enough time to dive deep into chemistry. Let's see, why is this still green? Here, okay. So yeah, so this is the kind of problem that we are interested in. We want to even fix the number of beads of each color, and then we want to say how many equivalent necklaces are there. So okay, so this right. Okay, so now we need one notion from permutations, which is the cycle type. So I have this group G acts on X. So X is a G set, and I have an element G in G. I want to say what is the cycle type of G. Okay, so I'll just draw the elements of my set X. I have X1, X2. Maybe I won't even label them. I'll just, okay. So my set X is like this. It's a, okay, maybe this example, it's not really a graph. Maybe it's a graph. There's some complicated graphs. I'll just think of it as a cloud of points. And then I have an element G. I have an element G, and so I take any element X in X, and I will draw an arrow to say where G takes this to. So G, let's say, takes this element to this element, and then it takes this element to this element, and so on. And at some point, I have to come back to where I started. Okay, because there are only finitely many points, I have to come back somewhere. I won't give the detailed proof. Maybe I come back here, but no, actually I have to, it will always be a circular kind of thing. The detailed argument for this is in the book, in the notes. So what will happen is that this set will break up into, you just see what G does. You start with an element. So I started with this element. I found it came back after 4 steps to this element. And again, I look at what G does to these various elements, and maybe, in this time it comes back after 6 steps, and this element, maybe it's mapped to itself. So what happens is every element of the set fits into one of the cycles for the element G. So these are the cycles of G. In X. Okay, so every element of capital X, it is part of a cycle of G. This is all because of the finiteness. If you had an infinite group, then it's possible that you would never come back. But because of finiteness, you have cycles, and the entire set becomes partitioned into cycles. And then there's the notion of cycle type of G. It's just the sizes of these cycles. So here I have a cycle of size 1. I have a cycle of size, perhaps this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is a cycle of size 7, and this is a cycle of size 4. I write them in decreasing order. So 7, 4, 1 is the cycle type of this this G acting on X. So we know that each element G acts as a bijection, and it's going to give rise to a cycle decomposition. So this is the cycle type of G. Okay, I hope this is clear. I didn't explain it in full detail, just but intuitively the idea is very simple. You have a group element acting on a set, and you just see how the set breaks up into cycles. Okay. Ooh, I need one more little thing to define, and this is the power sum symmetric function. So, okay, so suppose mu is, so this cycle type, I will always write it like this: mu1, mu2, how many ever cycles there are. Let's say there are m cycles, mu m, and I'll always write these in decreasing order. So mu1 is greater than or equal to mu2, greater than or equal to mu. So this kind of a vector is called an integer partition. Usually you assume that this is positive. Okay, so you don't write down any zeros. So this is called an integer vector, and to each integer vector we'll write down a symmetric polynomial p mu, which is defined to be in these same variables t1 to tr which we had for our weights. P mu is defined to be product I goes from 1 to m, t1 raised to mu1 mu I plus dot 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 plus tr raised to mu. So each each factor here is just a sum of the powers of the variables, and is clearly symmetric polynomial in the sense that if you interchange these variables in any, if you commute these variables, the polynomial remains unchanged. So this is called a power subsymmetric function, and this again in a lot of algebraic combinatorics, this keeps popping up. It's a very useful combinatorial device. And now with all this technology, so what we have G sets, right? Sets with G actions. We have colorings, which are just functions from X to the set of colors C. We have a notion of equivalence of colorings, which is just like, you know, the group action on colorings. You can't transform one coloring to another using an element of the group. And then we have the notion of cycle type. And then finally, we have this notion of power sum symmetric functions. So a lot of things to remember. And these are the ingredients of Polya's famous theorem, the Polya enumeration theorem. Oh yeah, oh sorry, bad news. One more thing I need to define. Okay, I'll just so if you have a coloring, you can talk about its weight, right? So I will just define. So I'll call this monomial here t1 raised to lambda 1, t2 raised to t. I'll call this t raised to lambda, where lambda is the vector lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda r. So so we will say C lambda x is a subset. It's a set of all colorings such that weight of f is t raised to lambda. Okay, I want to. These are all the isomers with the same atoms in some sense, right? So both these have weight, the same weight. What was it? This T2, T3 squared, T4, T5. So these two guys, they belong to C subscript. So 1 occurs 0 times, 2 occurs once. So let me just C subscript 0. Let me just copy out this monomial here. So we have this monomial. So oh, where is it gone? Yeah. So both these have these belong to C sub 0. The weight 1 occurs, second variable occurs once, third variable occurs twice. So these belong to C0, 1, 2, 2, 1, X. Okay. So that's the definition of C lambda x. And Polya's enumeration theorem, it's an equation of polynomials. So it takes sum over all possible, I don't know, what should I say? Yeah, sum over all possible colorings, possible, monomials. So all possible monomials of degree size of x. So we'll be taking these things, lambda 1, maybe I'll just write it like that. How about just write it, yeah. This is unnecessarily complicated. Sum over all lambda 1 plus dot 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 lambda r is equal to the size of x, C lambda x. So the number of one sec. Yeah, C lambda x mod g. So now, if you take a coloring, then its orbit will have colorings of the same weight, right? Because you're just transforming the elements, you're not changing the number of beads of any given color. So this to the times t to the power lambda, if you take the sum over all these lambdas, this is 1 over g. And now this is again an equation of the same kind. The right hand side is the sum over g, and p subscript mu g x1 xr. So this is the Polya enumeration theorem. So it tells you how many different necklaces you can have with each possible kind of you say how many red beads, how many blue beads, how many green beads you must have. So you just compute this right hand side, which is the sum over the group of some power sum symmetric polynomial, and then you look. Oops, this is not t, this is x. This is not x, this is t. So you look in the right hand side for the coefficient of some monomial, and it'll tell you exactly how many necklaces you can make which are different with the same set of beads. So in the special case of the necklace, and I can just the proof. Okay, so the proof is not very difficult. It's just using the same ideas. So what you do is you try to understand what this is. Now for this, the set of g orbits in C lambda x, you can use the Burnside's lemma. And so that says that it's the average over g of the number of fixed points C lambda x g. Okay, so this is by Burnside's lemma. And now you add this over all the things. So you will get again this. T raised to lambda. But we had this equation here, which the sum over all colorings of, yeah, of x wf, the weight of the coloring. So this is the sum over all colorings fixed by g of the weight of the coloring. This is the weight of the coloring. So this is the same as let me just see how to say this. So so I want to say that C lambda xg t raised to lambda. This is also sum over lambda is equal to summation, no, is equal to P mu G T1. I claim this. And this this thing is basically okay. So I have coloring, and what does it contribute to the left hand side? Sorry. So this is the same as the sum over all colorings F, and I just take the weight of F, right? Because a coloring in C lambda G F in C lambda G. Yeah. So I just take an invariant coloring, it will contribute exact T raised to lambda if its weight is T raised to lambda. So all the colorings in C lambda X will contribute W of F exactly, will contribute T to the lambda. So this is equal to this, and now let me just clear my head a bit. Why is this the same as this? So I'm looking at invariants. So yeah. So we are going to use this identity here. So yeah, so these are the cycles. So now what do I want to say here? Let me just so what you do is you take this right hand side. So this is product P T1 plus product over I summation Ti raised to the power mu I, and you use distributivity, then you can write this as, so summation I goes from 1 to R. So you can, if you use this distributivity, you can write this as I1 goes from 1 to R, I2 goes from 1 to R, IM goes from 1 to R of the product of T to the power Tij, J goes from 1 to M, Tij to the power mu I. Okay, now suppose we have the cycles x1, x2, xm are the cycles of G in X. Okay, then each of these I1, I2, IM, it determines a coloring F from X to C as follows. The elements of the cycle, elements of Xi have color let's say the elements of Xj have color Ij. So now if all the elements in the cycle have the same color, then the coloring is going to be invariant. Right? If I colored these points and the coloring was invariant under the transformation of the group, then all these elements would have to have one color. So I'd have to have like all the color here would be the same color, and all the elements in this, it could be, they could also be red, but they would definitely have to have the same color. And this element would have to have the same color. So if I want an invariant coloring, I need to put all the elements the same, and that is exactly counted by this. So if you choose, you're choosing which factor from each term, which term from each factor determines the coloring that you put on the color that you put on the cycle. So what we have is this, the generating function for the fixed points is P mu G of T1, T2, Tr. So this becomes summation, okay, summation G in G, P mu T1. And that's the proof of the Polya enumeration theorem. I'm sorry, this last proof, because of sort of lack of time, I should have taken a little longer to explain it, but it's written up very clearly in the notes. You need to go through it carefully. But I don't know, we can have, I can show you during the discussion some examples and how to actually compute this. It's not at all very difficult. Well, there were some comments here. Yeah, okay, feedback link. Cycle type 17. Okay, so there's one question which I missed. So the question is from Anza Ansari. Is the cycle type 174 the same as 714? Yes, cycle type, we don't distinguish between, we only care about what are the sizes of the different cycles. We don't care which, so we will always write it in decreasing order. And it doesn't matter here also, because we are writing this polynomial P mu G, it doesn't depend on the order in which you write the parts of P, because when you multiply things, this is commutative, right? So the order in which you write down the factors doesn't matter. Okay, maybe I'll stop the main talk here. Hopefully we can clarify some things. I'm sorry, the last part of the proof was a little rushed, but the theorem itself, we will try to maybe look at some examples and so on. But let me just stop here and let you ask some questions and we can have some discussion.